Every second of every day, the Earth is getting more and more filled up with plastic pollution. But it's not just the big, easily identifiable sort of pollution that's a major problem. The smaller stuff also incredibly important. And joining us now to talk about that is Deputy Environment Editor for the Center for Public Integrity, Jamie Smith-Hopkins. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Glad to have you here. I enjoyed your write-up about the sort of battle to get plastic producers to be responsible for the pollution. Tell us a little bit about these small bits of plastic, how widespread it's becoming.
Sure, these are plastic pellets, sometimes called nurdles, and this is the product of plastic producers. This is what then gets sent on to manufacturers to get turned into plastic bags and bottles and really a whole range of plastic items. And so what we found is that the US is in the midst of a plastic production boom. A good bit of it is expected to be exported to Asia, but at the point that's getting manufactured in the US, what people have been complaining about for years is that some of these pellets end up escaping the facilities and getting out into the environment, including waterways.
Do we know how that actually happens? Because I can imagine, a factory, it's producing this stuff, people consuming it. How does it get into the ocean? How does it get into rivers along that way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, this is the product that the companies are making. So it's not that they want to lose it, but they're really small. In fact, I can give you an example of that in just a moment. I've got a bag full of them from a researcher who has been collecting them. They're quite small, and so they can get lost sort of at multiple points in the manufacturing process. They can get lost from the facility as they're getting loaded onto trains and trucks. They can get lost sort of as they're making their way to other manufacturing facilities. These things are quite small. Again, here's an example of them. And they can often be hard to spot if you're not specifically looking for them because they can blend in or they can look like something natural like seeds. Birds, in fact, are among the animals that do tend to mistake them for something natural and they eat them. Fish as well. So what ends up happening is they get out of facilities and then they might get washed into a nearby creek or a stream and then they sort of work their way in some cases all the way to the ocean. And so this is a problem that researchers were noting back in the 70s, actually. And manufacturers say that they are aware that they have steps in place to try to contain pellets, but it's not always working.
And while I would love to be able to rely on them to self-regulate when it comes to this, we've seen how that goes in a lot of other areas. So in terms of the federal government and state governments, is there regulation on this sort of thing?
Well, if you talk to former regulators, people who used to work at the EPA, for instance, they say that the Clean Water Act is among the regulations that should allow enforcers to take action. But the message I'm hearing from people across the country is that you don't often see enforcement action. There are a couple of examples of it. Sometimes what ends up happening is that people complain and complain and complain to try to get regulators out to take a look and do something. And there's a particular case in Texas where residents complained and complained, and then they ultimately ended up filing a lawsuit.
And so I want to give people an idea of why this is so significant, because it's not just that it's out there that's a problem, but this can, as you pointed out, fish can consume it, birds can consume it. I imagine there's a concern that eventually that will work its way up to humans as well, correct?
Yeah, that's kind of the key question because we're in the food chain. So if you look at the scientific research, the consensus of the moment seems to be we don't really know the answer to that question. We don't want to be eating plastic, but the question is this gross or is this harmful? And some studies have shown that plastic pellets are quite good at picking up other things that are not good for us. Bacteria, for instance, or mercury. And so then the question just becomes, as it works its way through, say, fish or other things that we might consume, is that actually a health problem for us? And we don't really know yet.
And so you mentioned that we're going to be exporting more of this plastic abroad, and we know that the world population is still increasing. So in terms of US production of plastic and the ability of these places that we're going to export it to, how much extra plastic are we talking about, and how much confidence do you have that this problem isn't only going to get worse over time?
Well, in the US alone, analysts are projecting that polyethylene production, that polyethylene is the most common plastic, is going to increase 40% by 2028. Wow. And that a good bit of this, probably most of it, is going to end up in Asia because that's where where a lot of population growth and income growth is expected to happen. Asia has a lot of the countries that have been really struggling to deal with the plastic that they've got. So some of which is the plastic that their residents are using, and some of which is the plastic waste that the U.S. and other countries have been shipping to them to deal with. And so there's concerns about what this is going to mean. Because there's been so much growing concern, a number of companies, largely plastic manufacturers and some sort of consumer product companies, have joined forces and committed, I think, $1.5 billion to try to work on this problem of ocean plastic. And the early focus is in Asia. But I was talking to a zero waste advocate in Asia who's been dealing with this problem for a while, and he says he appreciates the attention. He's concerned it's not going to be enough because it's really a significant problem, and the expense of dealing with plastic waste is pretty high for municipalities.
And yeah, the details on the extra production that's going to happen soon and how much is already escaping into the ocean is really scary. And I would say that all of our viewers should go and take a look at this story. Jamie Smith Hopkins, we really appreciate you joining us and breaking it down.
Thanks for having me on.
Here on the Damage Report, we talk a lot about the big banks and their ways of getting rich off the poor. They saturate the market, but there are other options. And I've got info on a socially and environmentally responsible financial institution that has no ATM fees, gives you cash back on every purchase. They even commit 10% of their earnings to charity. It's called Aspiration, and if you go to aspiration.com/TYT to sign up, you'll get these perks, and that's more money to spend or to save or to spend. Just treat yourself.